I want to bring in Nigel Farage right now. He is a member of the European Parliament, a former leader of the UK Independence Party. It is good to see you, Nigel Farage, obviously on horrible circumstances here. What can you tell us about what's happening on the ground in London right now in terms of the sentiment of the people? How do you see it?
Well, it's jumpy in one way because I've been in London all morning and there are a lot of police cars around, a lot of police on the streets, quite a lot of sirens, and I guess we now know there have been a lot of raids in East London and at least a dozen people have been detained. So London is very quiet this morning. There are fewer people out on the streets than I would normally expect to see on a Sunday. I mean, generally, people do in this city, and don't forget we had the threat of IRA terrorism, long before this, people generally do respond incredibly well, despite the horrors that have taken place. But I do detect there is one slight change of attitude. And that is that every time one of these things happen, our leaders show their regret, their sorrow, their astonishment, and their shock. And I think we're a little bit less shocked than we used to be. We're kind of getting used to this, which is very, very bad news indeed. And I think people are beginning to say, what are our leaders actually going to do? Just expressing sorrow, just talking and using words like solidarity simply isn't enough. And Maria, I'll make this prediction.
Right.
Theresa May has spoken. Theresa May has spoken outside the steps of Number 10 today, and she's actually used the phrase Islamic terrorism. Now, I think that in itself may well be a first, because many of our politicians have been in denial, as indeed Hillary was, on this point.
Yeah.
But unless people see some really concrete action is going to be taken, then I think the calls for interning thousands of suspects will grow louder and louder.
Well, let's talk about that. What kind of concrete action do you want to see, Nigel? Because you think about the fact that we had the Westminster Bridge attack in March, followed up by the Ariana Grande attack last week, the concert. Now this, 3 attacks in 3 months. What concrete action do you want to see that we're not seeing coming out of the UK?
I want to hear that in our state-run schools and prisons, which we're in charge of, we are absolutely going to make sure that radicalisation doesn't take place. I want to hear that in the mosques in this country, we will actually be unafraid to kick out of this country people who go in there and preach hate, because frankly we've been too politically correct to do any of that. And I also want to hear, which I heard a bit of from the Prime Minister, that we do want to try, if we possibly can, to stop some of this stuff being there, freely available on the internet. I mean, that is an absolute minimum. But what really angers people is, for example, 2 or 3 years ago, I was part of a campaign that said if anybody left this country and fought in Syria for ISIS, they should be stopped from getting back into Britain. And you know something? 400 people have returned to Britain, having been radicalised further and brutalised in Syria. 400 have been let back in, and only 1 has been stopped. And that's why, Maria, I say, we don't want words. We don't just need the Prime Minister outside Number 10 Downing Street saying enough is enough. We want her to actually do something.
And let's not forget, this comes just the weekend before the general election in the UK, and that gap between Theresa May and her competitor has been narrowing. Do you think this impacts the election on Thursday?
No, because her competitor, which is Mr Corbyn, who leads the Socialist Party, Labour Party, but he himself is a very, very quite hard left socialist. Corbyn himself is seen to be weak on terrorism and weak on terror. So just because Theresa May was the Home Secretary in charge of our Homeland Security for 6 years, some may say she failed and didn't do enough, but it's very difficult to see the Labour Party, the Socialists, gaining any benefit from it.
Many of these people and these incidents have proven that sometimes the attackers have been on watch lists. There are tens of thousands of people on watch lists in the UK, even more so in the US. What do we need to do to get ahead of this, knowing that we're already watching these perpetrators that are going on to commit real damage?
Well, we don't yet know who these three individuals are, and my guess is the authorities will not tell us who they are until they've completed the sweep of all those closely connected to them. But I would be very surprised if these were not known persons, very surprised if they hadn't been investigated at some point. And I have to tell you, even though I've been one of those voices saying there is a real problem here, even I was shocked last week when I learnt there are 23,000 people of interest to the authorities in this country in relation to jihadi terrorism. So the problem that we've built for ourselves is huge. We've done absolutely nothing to deal with the segregation that exists within our cities. We haven't clamped down on radicalisation within state institutions. We've been very weak, frankly, with our borders. So we do face a massive problem, and I can't see, short of hugely increased resources for our security services, I can't see anything else we can do. Now, we could take the 3,500 who are the genuinely suspected terrorists themselves, as opposed to being linked and associated. We could round them all up and intern them in prison. That is an option.
Well, what you're saying is also one of the reasons that U.S. President Donald Trump has tweeted out saying, look, we need this travel ban in place, trying to push his policies on the heels of this horrifying situation in the U.K. I don't know if you think that's going to help sway minds in the U.S. Real quick, Nigel.
If I was an American and I was looking at London, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, and the increasing rate of terrorist atrocities, I would say, whether I like Donald J. Trump or not, he is absolutely right to be committed to attempting to make America safer. And it's absolutely wrong that judges and some on Capitol Hill are trying to stop him. He is trying to stop your country going down this route. He's right.
Nigel, thank you very much for weighing in this morning. Nigel Farage joining us in London.